Hi, everyone, and welcome to our discussion on the Raiders departing Oakland and heading for the bright lights of Las Vegas. I'm Steve Dempsey with the Bay Area News Group, and joining the discussion today from Phoenix, Arizona, is Los Angeles Daily News columnist Vinny Bonsignore. Vinny, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's actually the Southern California News Group now, so we have to. We change all the time, but that's where we are now, Southern California News Group.
And thank you for the correction. I'll remember. I should know.
You know how that goes up there.
That's true. And from Nevada, Las Vegas Sun writer Case Keefer. Case, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me again.
And I'm sure you're going to be pretty busy here pretty quick if you haven't been already. So, and finally sitting next to me is sports franchise expert Andy Dolich.
Yeah, that's an oxymoron. You can't be a sports franchise expert. And of course, I believe the Raiders would never be approved for Las Vegas. So don't use me to set the line in Vegas. And Steve and I apologize for not checking with each other on the blue shirts.
But we'll do better next time, I'm sure. Or we'll just keep wearing blue shirts. Who knows? So also, I wanted to remind viewers that in this article is a Scribble live chat attached. So you could use that to ask questions or make comments, and we might read them on the air. So anyway, I also want to remind viewers we need to end the broadcast at 12:30. So let's get going. I guess we figured that the owners were going to go in this direction. I mean, there would have been probably a chance, albeit slim, that they might have postponed it to May. Instead, the move was approved by a very large margin of 31-1. The Dolphins, the only one to hold out in favor of Oakland. I'll throw this out to whoever. Vinny, I'll start with you. Were you surprised by the wide margin?
No, not at all. In the days leading up, really from the moment that the Raiders secured Bank of America as a partner on the deal, replacing essentially Sheldon Adelson and the $650 million that he took with him when he walked away from the deal. Everything else was pretty much solidified from the NFL's perspective once that part of it got fixed, which to back up a little bit, nobody that I talked to in the NFL figured or felt like that was going to be an issue. When Sheldon Adelson walked away, everyone that I talked to felt like the deal is so good from a public $750 million standpoint, the brand going to Las Vegas, the NFL being on board, it was an attractive deal for somebody. And to no surprise, at least in the NFL, Bank of America came on board. And once that officially happened, it pretty much cinched the deal.
Denny, how much of a role do you think the NFL played in that quick assumption of having B of A step into Adelson and Goldman Sachs's position?
Well, I'm sure they behind the scenes or up front in the negotiations, I'm sure they had a hand in it. But again, from the very beginning, I don't know to what extent, but from the very beginning, which is why, not that I chuckled, but when I heard the narrative soon after Sheldon left that the deal was dead, nobody that I talked to within the NFL, it seemed like more of a local issue than a league issue. They felt confident, all of my sources, that it was going to get rectified and that there would be people lining up essentially to get on board with this deal. So what extent the NFL,
right? Essentially, with the largest ante of $750 million in the history of American sport by a municipal entity to a team.
No doubt about it. And you also had the power of the Raiders brand and the NFL's brand in a landmark transformational deal for the state of Nevada. There was a lot of momentum. It wasn't going to get knocked down by Nevada legislators. They knew the importance of this deal. I guess some of them had to ask themselves the question, okay, obviously Sheldon Adelson's probably not very happy right now, but do we kill this deal at the behest of him and his protests, or do we stand our ground and understand that this is a deal that's transformational for our state for now and forever, and put up with whatever anger he may have and disappointment he may have to do something that we feel is, for the betterment of this state for now and forever. And if you look at it from those terms, from the legislator's perspective, it wasn't a hard decision at all.
Case, the last time we talked to you, it was after Allison walked away. You were having some real serious doubts about this happening. So one, were you surprised by the 31-1 vote? And two, what is the mood in Las Vegas now?
I mean, no, not totally surprised at all. I mean, if I remember back then, I said that I thought this thing was still about 50-50, maybe a little bit less than that. I mean, just the $750 million, like Vinny said, I just, from being around the NFL a little bit, I knew that was something they were still going to pursue. I think maybe I was just pulled down a little bit by the general mood here. I mean, it was so down after Sheldon Adelson pulled out. Everyone that was so excited about it happening, I mean, even the politicians and everything, it seemed like they were a little bit pessimistic. So maybe I got pulled down a little bit into that. I still could have certainly seen it going both ways. And, I think now it's kind of taken a 180 again. I mean, people are excited. They're glad that, they found a way to do this. I know there's still a lot of controversy about the public money that's going towards it, as it should be. But the bottom line was, once that passed, once that $750 million was allocated, if it wasn't going to the NFL, it was going to, other stuff, the new convention center construction. So I think that people wanted the Raiders here. And certainly now, compared to the other time we spoke, there was so much pessimism. I think now there's just a lot of excitement, and people are ready for the Raiders to get here.
So you are seeing a real backing for the Raiders in Las Vegas.
Absolutely. I mean, that was one thing I really wasn't worried about, that I know a lot of people were, that, well, if the Raiders get here, are people even going to come to the games? Are people even going to care? I think that's really overblown. I mean, I think maybe even in some other professional sports, you could have some questions of if Las Vegas is a viable market, if the attendance numbers are going to stay up well. But I just think the NFL is just such another beast and has such a huge fan base. And, even if the Oakland fans are feeling scorned, I think that this is probably a good thing for the Southern California fan base of the Raiders. Vinny would probably speak better on that than me. I think they're going to have a ton of people up here, and I think that Vegas is going to show up well. So, I really am not worried about, once the Raiders get here, if they're going to have the support. In my mind, that's a no-brainer that they'll have it.
So, Vinny, the LA fans, big victory for them?
There's no doubt about it. They were down after the vote, which sent the Rams to Inglewood and gave Chargers, the Chargers the first dibs on that second spot. It was a loss for Southern California Raider fans. Then a couple of weeks later, not even a month later, when I reported that this was a possibility with Las Vegas, and that was renewed hope for them, because you're not just talking about Los Angeles, you're talking about Riverside, San Diego, San Bernardino, Orange County. Those are short drives, relatively speaking, and a very short flight to get to Las Vegas. And from the moment I reported that, I was getting hit up from fans all over the country, let alone Southern California, saying, is this real? Because if it is, I'm going to be a season ticket holder, and support them from Southern California. Much like there's a lot of Southern California fans who, when the Raiders moved back up north, stuck with them. I'm sure anyone that's been on a Southwest flight out of Burbank or Los Angeles on a Sunday morning of a Raider game day or a Saturday night can tell you there's a lot of Raider fans that made that trip up north, and they're going to now just divert it to Las Vegas.
Andy, is there a chance that we're going to see?
That sounds like a movie line.
Is there a chance that we could see a decent amount of fans going from Oakland and attending games in Las Vegas?
Well, first and foremost, I'm not a scientist, but I would like to inject a chip into Raider Nation forearms. Those people that say that's it, they're done, they're never going to be involved with the Raiders again in any way, shape, or form. And, as Vinny and Case pointed out, the excitement that you have in Las Vegas for those people that have already put their deposit down without even knowing what the pricing structure is going to be or exactly when the stadium's open. I'm a big believer that Raiders of the Lost Park has many, many more chapters to run. Do I think it's not going to happen? No, I was wrong, as were many others. But when are they going? Where are they going to play in the interim, if after 2 years of playing in Oakland and they don't have the third-year lease, where are they going to play? Are they going to play in Vegas? Are they going to Levi's? Are they playing at the field at Frank Ewell where they used to be? Are they going to San Diego? How are the Rams and the Chargers going to look at this once it happens, to have those people in the Inland Empire and the Raider Nation maybe bypass them if the Raiders are still on an upward mode? What, if any, kind of lawsuits pop up? Although I don't think there's anything significant. The NFL is pretty strong on looking in all this due diligence that went on. So I just think there's so many more chapters here, and everybody believes they know what's going to happen. And I think the 31-1 vote shows that nobody really knew exactly how this was going to come out. And there's still many, many more significant decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars in Las Vegas before that stadium opens.
Case, do you know what kind of hurdles the Raiders are still facing in Vegas right now?
I mean, really no major ones. I guess the thing everyone is talking about is exactly where the stadium is going to be. It certainly looks like it's going to be at Russell Road and the 15, which is right across from Mandalay Bay on the Strip, but not totally in place yet. So I think that's a lot of the talk right now. And like you guys said, I think the 2019 season is kind of what everyone's talking about right now, a lot of intrigue. I think a lot of people here are hoping that, hey, is there some way we can get Sam Boyd Stadium where, our stadium now up to snuff so that the Raiders could move here? I mean, it's way behind. It would need a lot of renovations. It kind of seems like a long shot to me. But I think there's a lot of discussion on both the stadium location and, how this thing's going to play out in the interim.
Case, I have a question for you, and I've talked about it. As you look long-term, and Vinny talked about this before, how do you see legalized gaming on NFL games in the future?
Yeah, I think that it's just a matter of time until gambling is legalized, countrywide. I think that, these moves to Las Vegas, even though the leagues are trying to say, this is not an endorsement of gambling, we're still holding strong with our stance. I think it is a sign that, they're coming around, they're becoming more educated, that really when there's legalized gambling, I mean, this is so regulated. This is not this isn't some rogue thing where they're against the interests of the NFL. I mean, the casinos here want nothing more than the integrity of the game as well. I mean, that they're putting their money at risk, and they're going to know immediately if something is off. So I think eventually you're going to see legalized gambling everywhere. I don't know when that's going to happen, but I certainly think that professional sports coming to Las Vegas is a little bit of move in that direction.
Having been in the business of selling PSLs and waiting to see what the Raiders number is going to be, and as we've talked about, it looks like Legends, the ultimate go-to organization to do it. They did it for the Niners. They're doing it for the Rams and the Chargers. I think there's a new seating classification that's going to be directed to Vegas, and it's the WSL. Do you know what the WSL is?
No, I do not.
It is the whale seat license. So if you look at all these casinos around the country, you got to take care of the whales. Your biggest
Absolutely, Andy.
What?
Andy's right on. Trust me, that's already happened in Reno. You'll see the casinos in Reno doing that as well. So not to interrupt you, but yeah, he's spot on.
No, I want to be the salesperson at Legends or wherever that's in charge of premium and suites, because I'm taking care of college educations and my future.
Yeah, because when you think about it, let's say you're a hotel casino in Reno, how do you benefit from that? Andy just brought it up. You have these big time rollers that come in on a weekend, and what you end up being able to provide as an enticement to stay at their place and gamble at their casinos is the Las Vegas to catch the Raiders game in our suite. That's going to happen. That's going to be a big part of this. So, which if you're the NFL and you're the Raiders, that's an attractive option. In Los Angeles, we have Hollywood, and we have big business that's able to support those type of suite sales and the big money that comes with these stadiums and that in the seating aspect of it. That's what you're going to see with this stadium in Las Vegas.
And I would just add to that is that the NFL is the perfect sport for Vegas, because literally you're talking about 8
No,
regular.
no question about that either. Absolutely. And I think
Vegas is an event location. And, you'd have to be deaf, dumb, and blind not to create super events, especially going
on the screen. It had already been addressed. And I think we are headed to a time where you're going to see more and this is a good test study for not only the NFL, but everyone else. If it can work in Las Vegas and there's no issues, and it's basically the perfect place to try, because Las Vegas, they're pros at managing gambling and keeping it as above board as you possibly can. So if it goes well for the Raiders and also the hockey team, then I think you will start seeing more movement toward getting this out in the open and being more upfront about it, and maybe even legalizing it.
Case, how does this affect the Knights, the Golden Knights, the Black Knights? Forgive me, I can't remember what their latest name is.
I believe it's the Golden Knights.
Yeah, no one wants to remember. Speaking of controversial topics in Vegas, not a popular name, but publicly, for the most part, they're saying, what you'd expect them to say if they're welcoming the Raiders. They're excited to share the city, but I think deep down in the organization, they would much rather be the only game in town, so to speak. I mean, this is going to be tough for them when the Raiders come. Working. Las Vegas is a smaller market than a lot of the markets that have hockey and football. They're going to be competing for a lot of the same sponsorship money, et cetera. So I think it's kind of not the best for them. I mean, right when they're going into their first season, there's all this excitement for hockey. Now the Raiders come, and it has just totally overshadowed the Golden Knights. I mean, there's been virtually no talk about the Golden Knights the last couple of weeks once this Raiders thing looked like it was going to get done. So probably not the best for them, but publicly at least they're not really throwing a big stinker.
Well, Andy, I got to ask you, because their owner came out, I believe it was yesterday, and said something to the effect that he'd rather see public money in Las Vegas go to firemen and policemen and schools, right, rather than stadiums. And I had to chuckle a little bit, because I can only imagine Gary Bettman, the commissioner of the NHL, cringing at the thought that one of his owners is basically saying, hey, next time one of our stadiums comes up for renovations or replacement, we're basically telling one of our owners just basically told cities that it's between us and you being able to fund your police department, which I think is ludicrous to begin with. There's money that's set aside for those things. You can do both if you're a big city that knows what you're doing and can handle it and can multitask. But I don't imagine that Gary Bettman was very happy to hear one of his owners essentially say it's between us and the police and schools and the fire department. That's not the narrative I would think that he wants.
I agree with you, and especially since Mr. Foley plunked down $500 million to get the expansion rights to Las Vegas. Not exactly a historic hockey town. That would raise a question, and if you look at all of those city services, now Oakland and the people who don't necessarily live in Raider Nation are talking about the effect that, of course, we couldn't spend public money because of all of the challenges that we have in our Oakland East Bay community.
Right. And the NFL never expected public money to be forthcoming with the Raiders, and that's why they were trying to angle it to a deal much like Stan Kroenke did with Inglewood. He got control of the land, 290 acres in the heart of Inglewood, and is building a stadium that's being paid for essentially by the development that he's going to do around it. Stan Kroenke's not putting $1 billion into a stadium in the middle of Inglewood just out of the goodness of his own heart. It makes sense for him to do it this way without public money because he has the land to support and that's what the NFL wanted to do in Oakland. They would have paid, invested $1 billion in a stadium. They just needed the land to be able to support it on the development and to raise the money offset construction.
So let's turn back the clock a little bit here, as to what happened in the beginning and how we ended up where we're here today. Because back here, obviously in the Bay Area, more or less, Mark Davis and the NFL, they're the ones looking like the villains here. But Vinny, according to your sources, when were the Raiders interested they were interested at one time making a deal with the A's?
Yeah, there's no question about that. And as recently and as late as January of 2015, Mark Davis and the Raiders sat down with Lou Wolf and Mike Crowley of the A's to propose a joint development stadium project on the Coliseum land, in which both the A's and the Raiders would end up with new stadiums, individual stadiums for themselves. And there were other elements and dynamics to that deal. I'm sure as the days and weeks and years unfold, all of that will come to the surface on how that deal would have been structured. But the bottom line was, not soon after, maybe even a day after that meeting, the Raiders got an email from the A's declining it. And from that moment on, from the Raiders' perspective, I think all faith was lost at that point. That was really their last ditch effort for them personally. Not long after that, they partnered with the Chargers, on the Carson deal, and then after that, obviously Las Vegas. Now, in the interim, or along with that, during that time from 2015 to last week, the NFL had stepped in place of the Raiders to try to get something done in Oakland, and that's what I was alluding to. There was discussion, and nobody in the room when those discussions went down between Eric Grubman of the NFL and the NFL and Oakland leaders, there was never any question that what the NFL was saying. Let us get control of the land on a lease, and then let us be the developers. We'll pay for the stadium ourselves, but we just need the land, like I alluded to earlier. There's been some talk since then that I think Oakland Mayor Libby Schaaf came out and said there was no official offer. No, there wasn't an official offer, but it was strongly implied and suggested as this will be what needs to happen in order for this to happen. And there was no confusion about that. And I got to say, the letter that Libby sent to NFL owners on a Monday morning in Arizona, in which she identified Eric Grubman as in this deal, despite having 2 years to do it and all the power that he had and everything at his hand to make a deal happen, he failed at putting a deal together. He was not happy about that. The NFL was not happy about that. It put the onus on them, which is why they came out and said, excuse us, but we all know what was talked about, when it was talked about, and what was talked about. And that was, we need the land. We're not asking for public money. We just need the land, much like Stan Kroenke did in Inglewood, to get a deal done that makes sense and pencils out for us and our product and our team.
So I guess Oakland did have the opportunity to do something, at least for the Raiders, without public funds.
Yeah, and that's it's sometimes as you report this story and talk to the people that truly know what's going on and the decision makers and that are in on these meetings. I'll say this: what I've learned in covering this story, politicians talk in cliches, and they do that for their purposes. I'm not knocking it. They have to do what they have to do to get reelected and do the best that they can do for their city. But I have to say this: the NFL speaks in absolutes. You may not like it, you may not agree with it, it may not sit well with you, but there's no question what they're saying and what they're outlining. So if it wasn't confusing to me, and I heard what was being told to Oakland almost every step of the way, what was being discussed, what was being offered, what was being suggested, if it was not confusing to me, it seems silly that it was confusing to anybody else. I highly suspect it wasn't silly. Oakland just,
I mean, if
that's what works best for their city, that's great.
I mean, as I look at that piece of land, having worked there for a bunch of years and seeing some success, you've gone from 3 teams now to possibly 1 team or no teams there, depending on what the A's do. And then, the movie King Kong, right? 'Twas beauty killed the beast. In this situation, based upon the timing, 'twas revenue sharing that killed the deal. Because
you're right.
The A's have the money in John Fisher, who continues to be kind of the Howard Hughes of team ownership. Mark doesn't, and he's been very clear about that. And could you do a deal at the Coliseum footprint? Without question. But you never had the teamwork. You never had the Raiders, the A's, the politicians, and the league all together on this. And I mean both commissioners in baseball and football, which doesn't normally happen. And hence you have a situation where you've taken a deal which is much better. And Oakland was never going to be able to do it. But I think as the A's looked at revenue sharing, and now it's going away over a gradual next 4 years, but when a few years ago, the A's were pocketing $30+ million saying, we're fine. we're good, we'll share, and then we'll make a decision as to where we're going to build. And ultimately, what happens at the Coliseum location, it may just be a development location with no sports, which is going to be hard to take, but it may be worth hundreds of millions of dollars of profit to Oakland in the long term.
And that's you know, again, there, to me, I'm not a finger pointer or who is at fault. Cities and fans and voters have the right to make decisions that are best for their cities. Teams and businesses have a right to make decisions that are best for their businesses, which I won't criticize Nevada. It works for them. It went through all the wash and analysis. It works for them. It didn't for Oakland for whatever reason, and I'm not knocking them or blaming them. I think that, you know, pointing fingers at this point is useless. Everyone made the decisions that work for them.
We don't have enough fingers anywhere. Anyway, I mean, if you look at all of those that are being pointed.
Yeah.
But it's sure going to be awkward, let's say, if the Raiders continue to play in Oakland for the next couple of years. I mean, how do you see this working?
SSB, schizophrenic, silver and black. I mean, that's what it is. Everybody's talking about potential toxicity. What happens if the Raiders win the Super Bowl in the next 2 years, or what happens if they don't win it until their first year in the new soon-to-be-named Megadome? This is a very difficult time, and as I said, people are talking, people are blaming, but ultimately what happens in the buy-in in Vegas and what happens in the environment in Oakland, to be continued. There's plenty more chapters.
Yeah, that's definitely the next phase of this story. And one of the cities you guys were talking about, cities that, you know, could be possible temporary homes in case things turn bad in Oakland. San Antonio has already reached out to the Raiders to poke around on, you know, hey, if you need a temporary stadium, don't forget about us. So that's another possibility. I think people are running with it, thinking that they're going to move to San Antonio for a couple of years. Their preference is to stay in Oakland, but if it did come to that and they had to play in San Antonio, it's not like they would physically move to San Antonio. They would still practice and play, I'm sure, in Oakland and fly in for their games, much like they did when they first moved to Los Angeles, and then when they moved back to Oakland. They stayed in Los Angeles and commuted on game days or the night before to Oakland, and vice versa in '82 when they moved.
Right, I think the Titans played in my former city, Memphis, before they went to Nashville, if I remember. So,
they did, in fact. They played in Houston 1 year as a lame duck team. It didn't work. That's, you know, if we want to use an example, yeah, it went horribly wrong in Houston. They had already been approved for relocation to Nashville, and they tried to stick it out in Houston while the new stadium in Tennessee was being built. It didn't work, which is why they ended up, like you said, in Vanderbilt for a little while.
Okay, I have one reader letter here real quick, and then I'll read this. It's a long one, so I'll try to keep it as short as possible. From Lewis Morgan, who blames the city and mayor 100%. These inept and corrupt politicians have no vision, no ability to move forward in any constructive way to assist the Raiders in finding a stadium solution. Delay, procrastinate. What did you think was going on? All the money in the Bay Area, what a shame. There was no imagination on the part of civic leaders.
well, corruption, that's a tough finger to point. Again, I look at the Mount Everest of $750 million in Las Vegas. That was never going to come from any place in California. And Mark Davis absolutely, positively did not want to sell any piece of the team that would lead to somebody else's control. And he would have had to do that, I think, in the Bay Area to build. So I actually think that Mark has come out in this, you know, to build the Raider brand in the future, where a lot of people sold him short and never thought this was possible. And now he's going to have the ultimate sports and entertainment magnet in Las Vegas in the future.
And it's quite the turnaround for Mark, just from 15 months ago when he, 16 months ago or so when he, took a pretty tough loss in Houston. The Raiders got crushed. Yes, they They had a second spot in Los Angeles, but behind San Diego. They were left without many options that night in Houston, but it quickly turned around for them. And I've written that 31-1 vote on Monday essentially made Mark Davis a made man. There were always questions when he took over. You know, can he forge his own way? Can he live up to his dad's legacy? Would he be respected? There was a lot of talk that the NFL was going to try to bleed him out and get rid of him. The turnaround that he's made over the last 15 months is remarkable, and at the end of which I heard a lot of respect and a lot of admiration from other owners toward Mark for turning this thing around and delivering a deal that it's never been as good as $750 million in public money, and it'll never get that good again. And lo and behold, it's the guy with the funny haircut who was ridiculed and severely underestimated all this time, who was the guy that delivered it.
Case, what Roman numeral will we see the Las Vegas Super Bowl take on?
Well, I think there's already the 2022 Super Bowl's the next one to be assigned, and if you look at these other new stadiums, I think that's about the time frame they've got in the game. So I think that's the odds-on favorite, we would say, here in Las Vegas, but if not, one of those years following. I believe that'd be 56.
All right, and Case, I'm sure Mark Davis looks like a hero in Las Vegas right now, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure right now people are really happy with Mark Davis, and I agree it's a pretty remarkable turnaround for him. Because even when this was first happening, you know, people were speculating around here, like who in Las Vegas can kind of shoehorn their way into getting a piece of the team because the owners don't like Mark Davis, and you know, you heard a lot of stuff like that when this thing was first happening, and now you just hear kind of universal praise for him. So it's been a turnaround here just locally.
You know, the other guy to keep in mind is Sheldon Adelson, and you know, when you think about it, he's going to get a lot of credit, as he should, for making this happen. That $750 million does not happen without Sheldon Adelson's participation and influence in Nevada. So he's going to get a lot of credit as the years move on for this happening. But he also didn't have to write a check for $650 million to make it happen. So he comes off pretty good. And on top of that, you got to figure that his hotels and casinos are going to get filled even more now that there's a big stadium in town that's going to host Super Bowls and Final Fours and concerts. So not a bad day for Sheldon as well.
All right, and then on that note, we're going to end this. Vinny, Case, Andy,
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Okay.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.